As their wounds began to close, Spencer and Tal settled for bonding alone. The waning moon couldn't possibly hold them accountable for the skittishness of their naive lamb. They interlaced both hands together and pressed vigorously as blood fell to the floor. Spencer demanded Tal clean the athame they were intending to use with Costello, bring about a renewed experience. She would ask him to introduce the instrument into her abdomen as they'd done dozens of times before. Tal never questioned her demands. He would drop to his knees to please her desires while he would harm her at any request. He'd become numb to the juxtaposition of pleasure and pain with Spencer. Tonight was a first. He was still processing the idea of another man sharing their experiences, whether it be self-harm or added pleasure. Costello was more of an examiner to their evolution than any type of threat. Costello didn't concern him. The political science professor following Spencer since she left her studio before meeting her girlfriends and eventually Costello was slightly more troubling. He was meek as the blessed according to Jesus, but he'd been in the throes of draconian infidelity with Spencer while she clutched his face telling him hard truths. She had no qualms detailing every second of his violation to the evangelical beliefs to which his poor family were affixed. Spencer truly thought she held him captive through his oath as an educator, but never knew how much his wife would torch the entire city of Seattle had she learned of his duplicity. Turned out there was a soul with knowledge of Tal and Spencer's secret relationship. The professor did just enough research to find out Tal had a family unaware of his affair in Seattle. He needed just 1 ounce of information to use as blackmail so he could put all this behind him and go back to his apocryphal life. Little did he know he found love in Spencer and was very much not in control of his emotions. She told the professor self-harm was such a slippery slope. She needed others to provide her the pain she required so badly. He'd never once plunged an athame into her, anywhere. What he was about to witness was going to test his will as a human and a lover. He came armed with a camera, lockpick, mask, and gloves. Starter kit for nefariousness. But his intentions were simple: to remain unseen and reticent, while gathering evidence for leverage against Tal, to persuade Spencer from inviting his wife to coffee, to tell her about the good professor's own little secrets. Tal and Spencer got quite a laugh about Costello. On one side, they'd never collectively lured anyone to her studio, while on the other, they'd never exposed their pagan ritualistic bonds to anyone like they had tonight. They both agreed Costello was an anomaly, and neither thought he would return in person or in spirit. The professor took offense to this invitation he'd never received. He began to see Tal as an enemy. Then his big brain realized he was part of a web that might have absolutely no explanation. He began to wonder what he was even doing, and then the sex began. He couldn't walk away from watching Spencer and how she engaged sexually with others. Within minutes, Tal brought up a beautifully designed and fabulously sharpened double-edged blade. The professor didn't know if this was the blade they cut their hands with, but based on the moment, it just looked ever more ominous than he'd seen. Spencer was engaged in a powerful orgasm. She propped up and told Tal to stab her. Without hesitation, Tal waited for her to guide his hands, and then he jabbed the blade into her abdomen. In between deep, hard breaths, she demanded he push deeper. Tal immediately shifted from absolute confidence to timid questioning. "Push what deeper?" Tal asked. "Everything," Spencer said without hesitation. Tal lost control and began to climax. As he did, he pushed the blade in deeper than either hoped for. Spencer immediately sat up. She knew it was too deep. It would require medical attention. Instead of pushing Tal off, she pulled him close. "This was our choice. Never blame yourself. We made a bond, and it needs to end in sacrifice. Give me what I need to immolate. Nobody ends my life, not even you, Tal. Let me burn, Spencer said as she trembled. Tal became completely unhinged. So many thoughts poured through his mind. He wondered if he would wind up a murderer. Then he pivoted back and forth from rationality to emotion. She might not die from the stabbing. If she chooses to self-immolate, it could give him his family back. Then it dawned on him he would lose Spencer. His blood is everywhere. Who the fuck was Costello? And would he become the witness he now didn't need? He would lose his family. Was it best to lay next to her and just close the book? He looked out in the parking area and saw a Jeep lit up with someone listening to music. He ran down and found Costello. Costello was even further down the rabbit hole than the last time he saw him. He slowly asked Costello if he could take Spencer to the hospital. Costello opened his extremely dry mouth and asked Tal if he would ever tell him a toast. He screamed about never hearing a single toast from him the entire night. Tal was oscillating back to his rational self and calmly explained he'd stabbed Spencer too deep and needed to get her to the hospital. It was an accident. You saw how much I love her. You know I wouldn't harm her, Tal pled. Costello bizarrely said, wouldn't it be better if we kept this from everyone and did the honorable thing? I've caused enough pain tonight. We can end this now. Here's to nevertheless, starving for more and drowning in the tears of a false prophet. Costello faced Tal and told him he was the one he'd been waiting for, and there he was crying like an infant. I waited all day for you, and you turn out to be a fake. I am the alpha. Tal realized Costello knew nothing of him. Nothing of his wife, his children, his home away from Seattle, but he knew he was fake. Their definition of fake didn't align, however. Tal let his version sink in. The truth would destroy his family. He calmed Costello and asked if he would lay him to rest next to Spencer. Costello didn't quite realize what Tal was asking. His broken thoughts returned to the earlier accident. How are you alive? Didn't I hit you earlier? Costello asked. Tal played along and said, you hit me with this Jeep. The least you could do was put me out of my misery and lay me to rest with Spencer. We accepted you as a friend tonight. Please do us this one favor. Put the blade I killed Spencer with inside of me and leave us. Just leave you? Costello asked with all of gravity weighing on him and his confusion. In your casket? Costello parked but never took the Jeep out of drive. He was barely holding the Jeep in place with the limp right foot on the brake pedal. While Tal was pleading for help, neither noticed the Jeep was slowly creeping. The sound of gravel grinding under the rubber of the tires began to grow louder. Just as Tal realized it, his pant leg was caught under the driver's side front tire. Costello was oblivious to the exigency. Tal dropped to the ground just as his pant leg came loose. The Jeep tire rolled over Tal's forearm, breaking the ulna and radius. The ulna was a compound fracture breaking through the skin. Tal crawled to his knees and said to Costello, why are you making this difficult? You broke my arm. Get your shit together and help us. Costello wasn't a murderer by any means and was still deep in a delusional state. Tal could see the confusion and tried to use it to his benefit. Costello jumped out of the Jeep and helped Tal to his feet. His arm was bleeding profusely. Tal noticed the Jeep was still creeping along in a haunting idle. He hollered at Costello to stop the Jeep and come inside and help end this chaos. Tal remembered Costello's willingness to follow them earlier, so he started walking towards Spencer's studio. What he didn't know was Costello was in a state of drunken delusion and his mind was battling an imbalance of serotonin. As he got to the alcove where her door was, Tal's consciousness went dark.